I just start by explaining the process. So, is this your first interview you're doing?
Yes.
Did you stay over at college?
Yes, I was just staying over on Bevington Road, yeah.
Excellent. So the way we work through this is that we have a number of set questions that we've prepared that we're going to walk you through. There's no right or no wrong answers. You should be aware that it's not about getting it or getting it right. So we just kind of want to hear you think. I want to see what you're thinking about the information we give you, and it's kind of more like a discussion, and we'll work you through it, and we'll give you bits and pieces of information, and you just kind of work with those. If you start with the first question, can you tell us about anything you've read recently in science that you thought was really exciting?
Does it have to be like psychology?
Oh no, definitely. It can be anything, any kind of science, anything you've kind of thought, oh, that's a cool finding, or that's a nice study.
I've actually been reading a book about sleep and like circadian rhythms, which has actually been really interesting because I'm not very far through it, but it's been interesting because you can kind of see it in yourself, like how much sleep you've had, or if you've stayed up all night, how it affects you through the day.
What did you notice that really fitted with you and your experience?
So there's like chemicals that build up when you get tired, but there's also your natural rhythm. So there's a point when you're getting more tired because of the chemicals building up, but your rhythm's coming back up. So you actually, like, the difference between them is smaller. So you feel less tired like mid-morning, and then you crash again. And I can definitely, like, I've only stayed up all night once, but I didn't enjoy it, and it definitely got kind of, you think you're fine and then you're really not fine towards the end. So
how did they measure the chemicals? What was the...
I'm not sure how they were measuring the chemicals actually.
Probably saliva. Okay, great. Should we move on?
Should we move on?
So Neely's going to ask you the next question. She's going to give you a bit of information, and then I'm going to be taking notes while she does that.
Okay. Yeah, so you can just focus on these. If I told you that there was a large recent study showing that firstborn children have slightly higher IQs than their younger siblings, what kind of explanations can you think of for this kind of an effect?
Well, depending on the age difference between the siblings, say if it was a 2-year age gap, then the oldest sibling will have had 2 years where if they were at home with a parent, maybe they would have the full attention of the parent and they might get more interaction. Yeah. Whereas a younger sibling might have, that time would be split between, because obviously a 2-year-old still needs attention, like the parent might spend more time with the other child as well, so they might get less interaction, which might affect maybe language learning or IQ in the long term, I guess. Yeah, that's a very possible explanation. If you think of this as kind of a more kind of nurture approach, right? So they've had less interaction, maybe less nurture. Could you think of different kind of hypotheses why it might be that the firstborn children have a slightly higher IQ? I guess you could go with nature as a maybe. Maybe because women have their eggs all through their lifetime, the eggs are just older, and it could be a...
How might that impact the IQ?
Maybe there's just some degeneration or age going on with the egg that would affect the development of the eventual embryo of the child. Yeah.
So if we go for these kind of two hypotheses for now, we just kind of stick to those. So there's on the one hand some sort of nurture, more attention and more interaction, and on the other hand something maybe much more basic biology. If I now told you that only children, so that's children with no siblings, don't show the IQ advantage, so what would you conclude now about your two hypotheses that you've just given us?
So that kind of discounts the nature one, especially my one, because the age of the embryo, the egg would be the same with an only child and a first child. And I guess that kind of already disproves it because the different age of the mother anyway. But
do you think older mums are more likely to only have single children as well, or do you think there's anything there?
Because I guess the risk increases with age and things like that.
So why are you saying we can discount this now? Because
as of when they're born, as of when they're born, the first children and the only children are equivalent because there's no way of seeing into the future and saying they're definitely going to have a sibling.
Exactly.
So that time can't really explain.
What about your other hypothesis on the nurture side and the attention, the interaction?
Well, I guess I was thinking about the interaction with the wrong person. So the older sibling, maybe it's not necessarily with the parent that makes the difference. It's with the other sibling. So because if only children don't show it, then like the difference would be the younger sibling rather than in the parents.
Yeah, you would even expect the opposite. You would expect these single
even
children
more.
who've had to have it even more.
Yeah. So maybe it's the interaction with the child.
So how could that work then? How might interacting with a younger sibling make you have a higher IQ?
I guess if you teach them things, like they say, like for if you really understand something well, you should be able to teach it to other people. And I guess if you're an older sibling and the younger siblings not managing something, you might go and help them or something.
Yeah.
And that, if the similar thing where teaching helps with like education in schools and stuff, it could be the same thing in the young children.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice conclusion. For the second question, Kate's going to present you something different, and I'll be taking notes.
So, first of all, I want you to describe what the data show in this graph here on the left.
If this axis is time, so with the normal rats, the more tries they have, the in the later ones it takes them less time to find the platform, so their performance improves with the number of trials they have at it. So yeah, but the rats with the lesions, their time doesn't decrease, so giving them more opportunity, more number of times they have to find it, the time doesn't decrease.
Okay. So what do you think we can conclude about the hippocampus and spatial learning from these data? So,
because the rats without their hippocampus, their time doesn't change. Maybe they can't remember where the platform is. So if the platform's not moving,
it stays in the same place.
Okay, so so these rats can maybe remember the location of the platform, so that when they try again, they're quicker to get back to it. Whereas with the rats without their hippocampus, they can't remember where it is, so they have to spend the same amount of time looking for it.
Good. So in another version of this experiment, the researchers used the same starting point on every trial from the side of the pool. And this time the performance of the rats is shown again, the rats with the lesion in red and the normal rats in blue. So what do these data show?
So there's a similar sort of thing with the normal rats where their time decreases with more trials. And I guess that's a slightly smaller axis, so maybe it's quicker as well because they're from the same place.
Yeah.
But actually, I guess the biggest difference is with the rats without their hippocampus. Their performance does improve this time, so more trials does mean less time.
So why do you think that the rats can learn this task better when the starting point is consistent compared to when it varies?
They're using slightly different skills in the two trials, so if maybe they know if they can always go in the same direction to get to the platform, that's kind of different to remembering where the platform is maybe, so they know it's that way, but they can't necessarily like orientate themselves.
So tell me again what the rat would do. So the rat with the hippocampal lesion, what would it do in this case when the starting point is consistent?
So with the consistent starting point, I guess the first time it would go randomly to find it.
Yeah.
But as the trials progress, the route gets more direct.
So it just
remembers where the
so it
platform is.
kind of just knows.
Yeah.
It just has to go straight or something.
Yeah.
So how do you think it knows that? I mean, how do you think it's solving the task?
I guess here the platform is kind of between the door and the chair, so it might be able to. So if it knows if it heads kind of towards the door, it will find the platform.
Yeah.
So it's using like references in the environment.
Just thinking again about this graph, why do you think the rats with the hippocampal lesion perform more poorly than the normal rats? So they get there eventually, but they take longer to get there, to be as good as the normal rats.
Yeah.
And they do make more errors, or they take longer. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I guess if you have an entire bit of your brain taken out, that's like quite a big thing.
Yeah.
So it might affect other areas as well.
Yeah.
So even if even if they're not specifically using the hippocampus, to know that the platform's by the door, it might be affecting the function of the other areas.
Like what kinds of functions might be affected by this brain damage?
Maybe if neurons are travelling through that region, or they can't get through because it's damaged, or
and what would that affect? What kinds of functions does the rat need?
It needs to remember remember that the door and the platform are.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs to like link those two together in its head. So it's got to know that.
But it's a bit slower, so it's doing it, but more slowly.
Yeah.
So why might it be slower?
So maybe the connections are weaker. It's got weaker association.
Don't worry so much about the memory part of it. What else might the brain damage have affected?
Vision, or
mm-hmm.
so it can't see as well.
Might not be able to
might
see
be
as well.
able to
The
see
lesion
still.
might have affected vision.
Yeah.
In some way. What else?
It's not as good of a swimmer. It can't get there as fast.
So that's good, because we've got a sensory problem and we've got a motor problem that might explain this poorer performance.
Yeah.
But can you think of another factor that's not that? Sort of maybe a bit higher order.
Like having a goal in mind, like wanting to get out of the water, it might struggle with.
Okay, just to look at the graph again, do you know what these bars are here? Do you know what they represent?
The standard deviations.
Yeah, they could be. There's some sort of error. So what's that reflect?
So it's a mean here.
Yeah.
So that's like the average time, but they've had rats that have. So some rats have done it quicker, and there are some rats that have done it slower as well.
Okay.
So there's a range in like level of performance.
Great. So is the variability.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Okay, great.
So that's pretty much it. That's all we had on our agenda to work through. But do you have any questions that you want to ask us?
I didn't do psychology A level, and I didn't know whether like it would be better to have done that, or if it's okay to.
Yeah, so it's quite common for many of the students that we have here to not have psychology A level. It's not a requirement, so we require one science, and that can be either psychology A level or maths or your standard science subjects. And the first 2 terms that you're here, the course covers some of the material that's been done at A level for some psychology students, but there's something that's new for everybody. So depending on what A levels you have done, you might find some other parts of the course are already familiar to you. But the purpose of those 2 terms is to kind of bring everyone up to speed, because we don't have any expectation that you come here with any specific knowledge or background. So cool. Yeah. Great.
Excellent. There's only one thing left, and that's to say to please not share any of these interview questions, because for consistency's sake we will ask everybody the same question, so it's in your own interest not to divulge and just to keep this to yourself.
Okay.
But that's it for us.